Sweet. One more minute.
Okay.
I feel like Jesus and Meryl.
You feel like what?
Jesus and Meryl. Watch that show. See, people outside of New York are not going to get it.
No.
Yeah. I asked somebody, should I introduce them as illustrious guests? I just
Is that trademark?
I like that.
Wherever it came from, it sounds fabulous. I like it. It sounds fantastic.
It too.
Yeah.
I just went with Chingona just to.
Oh, okay. That works too.
Okay, so we're gonna go live. It's 3 p.m. Thank you so much, Jolene and Gloria, for joining us. My name is Elizabeth Estrada. I'm the New York Field and Advocacy Manager with the New York Latina Advocacy Network, a network out of the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health. We are here because we are basically providing NLIRH's first live YouTube stream where we're very honored to have two very illustrious Chingona guests and leaders in the reproductive justice movement. So our first guest comes to us straight from the Bronx. Her name is Gloria Malone. She's a consultant and the creator of Teen Mom NYC, an online space that helps connect teen families to the resources that they need. Also with us, we have Jolene Cardenas. She is the communications manager at Color, Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights. Muchísimas gracias to both of you for being here today to chat about celebrating women of color's resilience and the fight ahead.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having me.
So, as you both know, this is a live YouTube stream, so we're welcoming people from all over to view us live, and we encourage everyone to ask questions. You're definitely encouraged to submit questions via the YouTube channel, and at the end we will reserve time to answer some of your awesome questions. So thank you so much for joining us now. We hope that you stay with us for the remaining 30 minutes of this very first live YouTube segment the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health is hosting. So I wanted to start with you, Jolene. I wanted to know, what do you see as the biggest challenges for women, particularly for women your organization represents and works with at this moment? Now, given the current political climate, the new administration, the sorts of legislation being proposed at both the state and federal level, and the overall hostile climate to our communities, has your focus changed at all?
Well, our priority has been and always will be on defending and protecting the Spanish-speaking immigrant communities in our state. We have coordinated throughout the years many forums and have offered Know Your Right trainings, some online and some in person, and really offered really crucial information to offer preparedness for folks in the event that they are separated from their families. This has evolved into a radio show that we actually host weekly now, and it has taken off in popularity, hosted by Gino Millan, who is our community organizer. It's called Mujeres de Color. A lot of the topics have to do with DACA, what's happening with driver's license availability for immigrants in our state, sanctuary cities. We also intersect those topics with access to healthcare, including what's happening with the ACA and how mixed status families are affected by that policy. And of course, we don't forget to bring in the topics when it comes to reproductive rights and access, including that discussion about abortion care and the stigma that surrounds it for the Latinx community. So it's been a tumultuous year, but it's been very productive in terms of reaching out to the community. We've really hit the ground running and embraced everything that's been thrown at us pretty effectively.
Yeah. I follow you all on your radio show, Mujeres de Color, and I've seen a lot of the wins that have happened in Colorado. Now, with that in mind, are there any strategies you're utilizing now more than ever?
Well, when it comes to strategy, overall, we've always used base building strategies that have remained intact, including door knocking and phone banking, social media outreach, and traditional media outreach in both Spanish and English. Recently, over the past few years, though, we have been more active in including artivism, and that is a very important tactic that we are seeing break barriers in places that we really hadn't considered previously, to help a culture shift. We want to really leverage art to raise RJ related topics and engage folks in our base. Some of the things that I'm really proud of is recently Remarkably Normal is a play from the 1 in 3 campaign. 1 in 3 women have had abortions. And that toured in Denver a couple years ago. We had the opportunity to actually do a Latinx transcreation project where we created a Spanish version specifically geared for Latinx families so that we could bring that topic to the front of discussion. It was very well attended, and we took questions from the audience and really broke down a lot of barriers when it came to the stigma behind abortion for the Latinx community. We've also included a photo essays exhibit. 3 of our coloristics have been able to participate in this exhibit. It is a traveling exhibit. They are able to speak at some of the events in the area in front of, I believe it's 6 or 7 large poster portraits of their story and humanize the stories of abortion.
Wow, this is super interesting. Mm-hmm. So just to follow up with that, this is a question open to both of you. So I encourage you both to think about, I'm just curious to know how you and your members and people that you meet in the community through your work have been able to bridge generational gaps, or if that's an issue, and if, just kind of talk to us about how intergenerational gaps have been filled within your work and your membership.
Do you want to answer that, Gloria?
Sure. Yeah, so most of my work centers around pregnant and parenting young people. And I always tell people that when you work with teen parents, you're working with 2 generations at once, because they're parenting young people themselves. They are young people, and they're still very much someone else's child. And so if you're doing the work in a way that is life-affirming, then you're automatically touching more than one generation, and you're addressing some of those generational gaps. Things that I've done before are things like having teen family portraits, and so the family and their children are able to have beautiful family portraits, with many young people don't always get because of their age, and so parents and families and society at large generally doesn't want to celebrate the pregnancy of someone who was in their teen years. We also talk about things and just pop culture and political and politics as well, both with the young parent and the young parent's child, right? They may be in the room. It's not necessary to always remove children from the space. And so, right, if we want to really change the world and do intergenerational building work, we have to have our young people, the young people of our young people, hearing conversations about how to be trans inclusive, how to know your rights, how to use your power, how to use your voice. And so I think it's about not taking like a singular approach to like, we just want this one member and not no one else that comes with them, right? And so if someone shows up with their mother or with their friend or with their child, just continuing to do the work and adjust space, but like physical space and, literal figurative space to include conversations that are accessible to all folks who are in the space. And that helps also relieve some of the tensions that may happen when we have, we're helping young people come into their power, and especially in immigrant communities where we're often told, to be quiet and to not disrupt things because our family has immigrated to this country or wherever we may be. If you have a young person talking about, well, I know my rights, right? And then you have a mom who's like, you need to stop all that rights conversation because it makes me nervous. It's important to have those conversations with the parents of that young person so it doesn't cause so much tension in a household. And so we're not creating or furthering generational rifts that may exist already within a family.
Jolene, do you have anything to add?
Sure. So Gina is still our superstar, and she reaches out to the Spanish-speaking community on a regular basis and hosts parent-family workshops where she discusses with señoras topics that may be a little too taboo to speak with anybody else, maybe in a space where they feel more comfortable sharing, such as their children's school. She'll reach out to a parent liaison at the local schools. Usually it's a high school or a middle school, and she'll follow up with them in these workshops where they can feel free to ask questions about anything, from LGBTQ parenting to sex ed to domestic violence, and how to speak with your kids about those topics, and really erasing some of the myths that were behind talking to your children about those topics. And it's been extremely effective. She's done it for years. And a lot of the times those folks will become more involved in our organization as well. We recently had a participant from the Parents and Family Workshop speak at our Latino Advocacy Day event. And she was, there was an anti-sanctuary city bill that was coming up, and she was able to stand up in front of the crowd and address why it was important to fight for our rights as immigrant communities. So we really try to build a leadership ladder here, starting with just breaking down those basic barriers.
Yeah, I'm a lot of the stuff that you all are saying really resonates to what we too believe at NLIRH in terms of intergenerational organizing, leadership development, affirming spaces, and creating trans inclusivity even in those intergenerational conversations. I know Gina personally, as well as her daughter, and that is, I think, really a beautiful display of what intergenerational organizing can really look like, and having those, your membership and your activists and staff look like the familia that they really are. It's something that we here at NLIRH also strive for. For those of you who do not know, Gloria has also been really instrumental to the young parents work that we have done with NLIRH. We've taken a lot of Gloria's advice for our agenda and what types of resources that young parents need. So I think that this is a subject that both Color and Gloria can really kind of have been breaking barriers and creating platforms that I don't know I have seen in other spaces. So thank you so much for that, and for continuing to kind of lift that up and creating inclusive spaces and intergenerational spaces, especially in Latinx communities that perhaps there is a perception that we cannot have these open conversations. But I think that Color and Gloria really are a testament to the fact that that is actually not the truth, that our communities are far more open to having these conversations, and in those conversations and in that dialogue, it creates better patterns of healthy and loving relationships, better models to how then to pass on this information and knowledge to peers, mothers, tias, abuelas. So it's something that I'm super proud to be connected to both of you and both of your works. So thinking in that regard, my next question is for you, Gloria. I wanted to know, with the advent and success of movements like the Women's March, the Me Too movement that has been around for a decade now, but has kind of seen a resurfaced, do you think women are making strides in reclaiming their power? If so, does this extend to women of color? And what sort of impact do you think these recent movements have had on our communities, on the communities that you work with?
So I'm going to have to kind of loosely quote the founder of the Me Too movement, Tarana Burke, to answer this question. A little while ago, Cardi B was talking about the Me Too movement in an interview, and she said that, well, what about, in short, Cardi B said, well, what about sex workers? What about girls like me, like regular girls like me from the Bronx who are loud, who, aren't aren't white, aren't famous. What about us? And so it's a super valid critique, right? And the founder of the Me Too movement, Sharona Burke, got on Twitter and she addressed this. And I think what stood out to me that she said was, we have to make sure that we're not letting the media drive the narrative of our movements, right? And so all the media only wants to cherry pick certain women, usually cisgendered, heterosexual, financially affluent white women, to be the face of certain movements. It doesn't mean that that's where they started, or specifically who those movements are for, right? So Sharona Burke, a Black woman from the Bronx, started Me Too over a decade ago, actually, and had been doing the work for so long. And so I think it's not necessarily, to me, it's not necessarily reclaiming their power, right? Because I feel like every day that a woman of color wakes up, she's reclaiming her power in a society that doesn't want her to wake up. But it's about where the microphones are being given for folks to tell those stories. And what was really striking about the Me Too movement and how Me Too was like, Me Too, or I forget who was like the Time Person of the Year, was that the Black woman from the Bronx who started this movement over 10 years ago wasn't even on the cover of Time Magazine's Me Too Person of the Year cover. And so I think it's a difficult question. I don't think it's black and white. And I absolutely do not think that allowing media, mainstream media, to drive the conversations about women reclaiming power is reflective of the work that women of color, trans women, and gender non-binary folks have been doing for decades, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I feel about it.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you for raising Sharona and Cardi in this chat, both from the Bronx. On that vein, I wanted to know if you have a platform in which you use and you write with Echoing Ida, yes, and you have your own platform on your website, which you use to kind of challenge the narrative. I think that's part of the culture shift work that we must do in order to change perceptions, as we were talking about before, about the Latinx community, about the women of color, about Black women, especially in the face of this resurfacing of the Me Too movement and this kind of like misconception that it's new or that it's led by white women, as Gloria very clearly stated it wasn't. So in that kind of leads me to ask you who you think is missing from the conversation about women reclaiming their power. You mentioned, the founder of Me Too, Sharona Burke. Do you wish to expand on who else might be missing?
I think that I don't think there's necessarily people missing from these conversations. Again, I think it's people getting access to what they've been doing for years, right? To get microphones and grants and money, right? Because as much as we don't want to say, and in my opinion, let me say it that way, in my opinion, many people don't want to associate money and power as something that people of color should have or that we should aspire to. And I don't think that's right. I think that in a capitalistic society, you absolutely need money to have conversations on a bigger platform. And I know that may sound icky to some people, but it's really valid and true. And so I think that people who are I don't think people are necessarily missing, I guess is what I'm trying to say. People have been talking about things for a while. It's just the fact that it's on us to amplify voices that we know are speaking and talking, and it's on us to give those opportunities to folks, whoever we think that they may be, right? So if we're talking about what does family leave policy look like for somebody, well, let's talk to moms, right? Let's talk to people who are parenting. Let's not always talk to policy folks at these great institutions that may be doing great research, but aren't really talking to mothers, right? And what does family leave policy look like when you're actually a domestic worker to a family who has family leave, right? Or your family is in a different country and you're in another country. So what do these conversations actually look like? And what do we mean when we say family leave? And so I think it's a lot of who and what is missing is an interrogation of buzzwords that we have. And also always making sure that we're not being cis normative and heteronormative in our conversations.
Mm-hmm. Jolene, do you have anything to add to that?
I actually don't have too much else to say that hasn't already been said. You guys are killing it. I'm just like over here like, yes.
Gloria, that's all Gloria.
Right. Like 100%. Yeah. Money is not an enemy to the movement at all. And I think that because we are women of color, we're asked to do it out of the goodness of our hearts and the strength that has been pushed upon us, right? It's like just feeding into that narrative that we're just here to continue doing your work for you for free. And that's actually my next point in our future conversation here. How do you become how do you gear funding towards transformation instead of being purely transactional in a capitalist society? So I think we could have many discussions on that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think that oftentimes as a part of that, cultural misconception around how I think that there's like a pathology that exists when speaking about Black and Latinx communities, when in terms of money. And remember the first time that I had to do like a fundraiser, and like the ways that it made me feel to be in a position to ask someone for money, when in the back of my mind, I full-heartedly believe in the work and that I was doing and promoting, but still there was an apprehension. And I remember one of my colleagues told me, if there's no money, there's no mission. So how do we, reconcile that? And I think that both of you are really on to ways in which we've already started to do that and be more comfortable doing that. And then saying that it's, for lack of a better term, it's something that is owed to a community that is given so much for so little, especially immigrants in this community working underpaid. We look at the farm worker movements and the Coalition for Immokalee Workers that were just recently in New York doing a 5-day fast. These folks are not demanding too much. They're demanding dignity and health, yes? And it's not completely out of the norm for us to ask for those things. They should be given, but we must demand them. Mm-hmm. And in that, it puts us in a kind of way to feel that we internalize that not deserving kind of idea onto ourselves. So a lot of the insights that you guys have provided really kind of go to this last question that I have for you all in terms of insights on how we can go about making the conversation more inclusive, but also reflective of the struggles of women of color. I think a lot of the points that you both were talking about, making trans-inclusivity, trans-inclusive spaces, trying to move outside of the cis heteronormative model that perhaps we have. So what are your reflections on how ways in which you've made, what that looks like for you and your membership and the people that you work with?
Do you want to go first, Gloria?
Paint us a picture.
No.
Okay. Okay. So it's really this is for anything ever for everyone to listen to. We need to continue to center the experience and leadership of people of color, of folks of color as well in this movement, in any movement that we're part of, in any space that we're part of. We need to be forefront and asking for that, and not feel that should be a side project. That's one of my big notes. That's one of my mantras is we're not a side project. We are the leaders. And when it comes to funding, we need funding partners who understand what that means and who have a commitment to making transformational philanthropy happen as opposed to the transactional, and not have those kinds of expectations on our organization, because that's not what we're about. We're about transformation. And sometimes that's not going to give you solid data. And that's just the way it's going to be. So it's really a culture shift within the nonprofit complex, really. We really need to advance anti-oppression work in coalition spaces. It's something that it's hard to explain outside of the nonprofit world, but when it comes to collaborating with partners and allies, we want to make sure that we have consensual allyship, which means that our voices are going to be central to those conversations, that we are not going to be seen as a follow-up once all the decisions have been made, to just get a clearing of, yes, it's okay, go ahead and push it through. So there's a lot of work to be done internally, and that lays the groundwork for getting change where we want it outside of the organization.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Gloria, do you have anything you wish to add?
Yeah, I think making movements more inclusive looks like looking at your membership base. Like if an organization has a job opening, looking at your organization base and see how you can hire those folks, right? And like if we're working with these people and we're giving them tools of like leadership development and all of this, then what does it look like to also hire from that pool? Also making spaces more inclusive by addressing the, like, I know that a lot of organizations aren't necessarily direct service work, but being able to call, so like if you know that someone is struggling with finding diapers, right? Like providing diapers for that person coming in for that meeting is a big deal. Or, you know, if you know an organization that does diaper giveaway stuff, then connecting people with those things instead of making relationships, as Jolene has said, as you have said, really transactional, but also addressing the needs of folks who come into whatever space they may come into, where we're at, right? Because if we're talking about transformation and we got our community and all of this, we really have to practice that from the beginning.
Yes, I definitely agree with both of you. I appreciate your thoughtful responses to questions, not only for being with us today, but for taking the time out of your schedule to prep with us and, you know, just to join us and lend us your expertise. I wanted to know and kind of make the space for you all to tell us about any upcoming events, any upcoming projects that people watching can plug into.
So Calore is launching a billboard project next Monday that will be in the surrounding metropolitan area in Denver, billboards in Spanish and in English that inform folks on just raising awareness that there are fake health centers out there in their neighborhoods that are targeting women in immigrant communities who are seeking abortion care or pregnancy information. And we're going to make that very interactive. We'll have some websites set up that you can make a pledge and that, you know, you're going to push for real healthcare answers in your neighborhoods instead of this limited access information that's being disguised as real medical care. So we're really proud to get that started. It's been a long time in the making, and it's a bilingual project. So we're really looking forward to bringing this to the community.
Wow, super exciting.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Congrats.
Thank you.
Another movement space I'm involved in, No Teen Shame, will be at the Civil Liberties and Public Policy Conference in Amherst, April 13th through the 15th, and we will be presenting a workshop titled Not Our Burden, Young Parent Stigma and Intergenerational Impact. So if you all are going to CLIP, be sure to check out our workshop.
Awesome.
Oh, super exciting. A lot of our membership or a lot of our activists attend CLIP every year. You'll see some of our Virginia activists up there, our Texas activists, and Florida activists. I wanted to thank you both again for being here, for being awesome, and for giving us your thoughtful responses. Just as an FYI, I don't think we're having any questions being submitted from the YouTube viewers. But I did want to give everyone Color's Twitter handle, which is Color Latina, at Color Latina, and Gloria is at Gloria Malone. The New York Latina Advocacy Network is at NY Latinas, and then of course our national handle is at NLIRH. And thank you both so much for being here once again. We hope to see you very soon, and good luck on all your future endeavors.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for all the work that you've been doing. And Gloria, good luck to you, everything that you are endeavoring in. I wish I could go to the workshop. It sounds amazing.
Thank you, Jolene.